What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 216. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone, rounding out another week here with a bonus show. And part of that is because I got a lot of news to talk about: Ukraine, Russia, Yemen, North Korea stuff on today's show. But also, the show has been really doing well. And so the energy from the audience has been absolutely great. And so I'm going to try to match that by continuing to put out extra content. And I must be really good because more and more people are tuning in, and I know that's in part because the audience is just out there sharing the show, recommending it, and all that kind of stuff. So continue to do that, and I'll continue to put out bonus content. We're well on our way to having the best month ever on this show as far as download numbers and everything go. So really appreciate everybody who's supporting the show, and not just by sharing the show or whatever, which you find at the Libertarian Institute, the blog at antiwar.com. We got a Twitter page, we got a Facebook page that you could follow the show on. YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey for the video version of the show, up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. You could donate at Patreon, Subscribestar, Crypto, all that information in the show notes page. And you could also get your New Year's off on the right start. Get your CBD products at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. The promo code is PEACE. That saves you 25% off, and it gets the show a kit bag. So it's an absolutely fantastic deal, especially since I know a lot of you already use CBD. I assure you that the products that they have at Paloma Verde are just as good, probably better than what you're getting already. And the lab test results are right there on the website. They got a great selection of products, so I'm sure they'll have what you want. And so check out Paloma Verde, support the show, share the show, anything you can. Let's get into the news. All right. First story today is from Yahoo News, titled CIA-trained Ukrainian paramilitaries may take central role if Russia invades. And this story is, as far as I could tell, an official CIA leak. It's put out by the same author who put out the article along with Michael Iskoff on the CIA's plans to kidnap or assassinate Julian Assange. And nobody who talked to the press in that case was in any way punished as far as anybody knows. And so, there's reason to assume that this guy's sources are people who are speaking at the behest of the CIA and not to blow the whistle on they see as something as nefarious. And that's mainly the way this article is written. So for just a quick background here, I'm sure most of the audience knows, but in 2014, then the Obama administration, you have Joe Biden himself being a key figure in this, Jeffrey Pyatt, who was the U.S. ambassador, I believe, to NATO, and then Victoria Nuland, who was also a U.S. diplomat in the region. And they orchestrate, mainly Victoria Nuland, a coup to replace the president of Ukraine, who was duly elected because he was somebody who wanted to take not just a pro-Russian position. I think it gets oversimplified just to say that he was Yanukovych was just pro-Russian. He was willing to make deals with Russia. He wasn't going to rip Ukraine away from Russia, but he was also open to making deals with the West, and that was pretty clear from the legacy. But the West only wanted Ukraine to be in their sphere of influence and not to have a relationship with Russia. And so this was described by people within the foreign policy establishment as stealing away Russia's girlfriend and everything like that. Carrying out this coup in 2014 where they installed a new government of Ukraine that was very, very pro-Western and very anti-Russia. One of the steps that this government was going to take is to remove Russia from the Sevastopol naval base that's located on the Crimean Peninsula, which at the time was Ukrainian territory. Russia had a long-term lease for this base, and this was an old Soviet base. Ukraine, including the Crimean Peninsula, was Russian going way, way back. The Crimean Peninsula in particular to the founding of America, I think maybe even the same year, 1776, that actually becomes Russian territory. But, Ukraine is a part of Tsarist Russia. It's not just like some Soviet state, some former Warsaw Pact member. This is a country that has a lot of not just historical ties with Russia being a neighboring state, like, say, the US and Canada, but, real deep ethnic ties with a huge percentage of the Ukrainian population actually being ethnically Russian and primarily a Russian speaker. And this is particularly true in the east of Ukraine, which is, of course, near the Russian border, and then on the Crimean Peninsula. And so in response to the Ukrainian government planning to kick Russia out of the Sevastopol base, Russia just annexed the Crimean Peninsula. And while this was a changing of borders, and not that this necessarily ensures that, that it was the greatest thing in the world that Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula. You do have the fact that a vast majority of the people of Crimea then voted to join Russia. And Russia has spent a lot of money in Crimea on infrastructure improvements and everything like that over the past 5 or 6 years. And so that's been going on, and Russia holds Crimea. I don't think that's going to really change anytime soon. But there's also the area in eastern Ukraine. Again, this is the ethnically Russian area where, they broke off and started fighting a civil war against the central government there, or the central government started fighting a war against them, particularly, the bad guys that we talk about, like the Azov Battalion, the white nationalists, Stefan Bandera worshipping neo-Nazi esque, troops. You just go look up the Azov Battalion. There's no doubt from the pictures, the banners that these guys march under, that they're certainly white supremacists, ethno-nationalists who, want a Ukrainian, in terms of, ethnically Ukrainian state, and don't much care for, people who speak Russian, or I'm guessing people who look different from them whatsoever. Yeah, so that's the civil war that's been going on, and that's really what we're talking about here, that this issue in eastern Ukraine. And so in response to this, in 2014, the Obama administration set up the CIA, and I think they called it the Ground Branch. And this was I guess, CIA operation. Don't know everything that they do, but one thing that they did in 2015 is they set up a Ground Branch paramilitary training facility somewhere in the southern United States. Not exactly clear where that is. I guess my suspicion when I read this article was in Florida, but that's just my personal suspicion. And so what's happening with this program, we don't get a ton of details on the program in the article, but that there is a paramilitary group that's bringing groups of Ukrainians in the United States for weeks at a time for training in a number of tactics that they label as defensive. Firearms, camo, techniques, land navigation, and some people who are involved with this project, talking about this project, say essentially what the United States is doing here is training people in the tactics needed to become insurgent leaders should Russia invade Ukraine. And I mean, this is absolutely as insane as it sounds, in that, we're training these people in tactics that will be labeled terrorist tactics. Also, we're talking about giving this group Stinger missiles. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable, but it really sounds like the United States is trying to create another Afghanistan for Russia, almost to bait Putin into invading Ukraine, thinking that we're going to be able to bleed Russia or something once they do, with all these forces that we trained up. Now, for those of you who don't remember, that didn't really work out well for the American people, because in the beginning, we're giving weapons to people who are killing Soviets and everything like that, but eventually, those people are Osama bin Laden and the founding members of Al Qaeda. And with the extremist groups that you do have in Ukraine, you really have to wonder if that that could be repeated here, that essentially you're going to give people who are extremists, who are radicals, who, again, we're talking about not jihadists, but neo-Nazis and white supremacists in this case, people who don't mind using violence, who, have very ugly beliefs. And to me, this is extremely concerning. Now, again, this article is written as, well, this is going to be something that an asset of the United States should Russia invade Ukraine. And yeah, I guess for a time, the Mujahideen was an asset of the United States fighting against the Soviets. It cost them a lot of money, not probably exclusively, but part of what ends up breaking the Soviet Empire is the loss in Afghanistan. But again, it's also that same kernel of insurgency that the U.S. planted in Afghanistan that eventually, becomes the foil that also wrecks the American empire. And, the Americans did really bad in Afghanistan and the Middle East as well. So this hasn't turned out to be a great move on the U.S. part. They label in this article that the program has been a high priority, and that at some point, it's not exactly clear to me when, but the paramilitaries also, the U.S. CIA contracted paramilitaries are also traveling to Ukraine and apparently fighting on the front lines. And so, we've been hearing for years that there's always this low level of fighting that is going on in eastern Ukraine, people being killed by landmines, tanks or armored vehicles being hit with anti-tank missiles, things like that, sniper fire killing people. And you really have to wonder how much of that has been going on because of the CIA paramilitaries that are going over there and finding conflict to train the people that they want to train. And so, I find a lot of really concerning details in this article, but again, this is written as an official leak and is very much presented as, this is a good thing that the U.S. is doing and giving us more assets in Ukraine. So, just one more quote here is that they actually say that the fighting on the ground, that it turned the tide. Gains were made on the battlefield as a direct result of the program. And so, this could just be, and I want to say the thing about this is official propaganda before, it could just be that they're really trying to inflate the value of this program because they see it being maybe important to selling things to the American people in the time to come. But it could also mean that, the reason that the fighting on the ground is actually happening in Ukraine is because, at least partly, this program. So, there is another quote in here, somebody saying that if Russia invades, it won't be able to hold territory in Ukraine because of this program. And they say that this program is likely compromised by Russia, that Russia's aware of the program, and that Russia has tried to target. And the target was unclear to me if it meant like target for killing or maybe target for becoming a double agent like figure or something like that. But Russia has tried to target graduates of this program and has tried to assassinate others. And so my guess is that they've tried to recruit some members of this program for whatever reason, do whatever. And so man, it really is very interesting, and you just really have to worry and wonder like what the long-term impacts of this kind of program is going to be. Also, questions that weren't answered in this article, like who the hell is training and why the CIA or like the special forces are, this doesn't have to be a covert program and doesn't have to be done by contractors. So who the hell is training these contractors? Or not who the hell are the contractors is an extremely important question that I have here. Also, how many? They say people coming for weeks at a time. This has been going on for 6-7 years now. So who knows how many people that this has trained up. It could be hundreds, thousands. I'm guessing it's more than just a few dozen now. Over time they've gone, they've died, they've maybe retired, left the battlefield, something like that. So I'm sure the ranks have dwindled some from the total number of people trained, but Just really interesting story here, and something that hopefully we get more details on. But I think is very important to understanding not only what's been happening in Ukraine during the civil war, but also, in the future, because some of the things we're going to talk about next, what may happen on the ground in Ukraine. We have to understand that there's CIA trained paramilitaries all over the place. We're going to keep talking about Ukraine here, but this is, a little bit more in relation to Russia, talks, and potential conflict. And now, the U.S., the Department of Defense, actually, I think John Kirby, the spokesperson for the State Department, actually issued this warning that Russia was looking at operations to carry out a false flag in eastern Ukraine to manufacture a pretext for invasion. And this is an interesting statement. Now, in one sense, if you're the United States, you put this out, it's kind of a way to prime the American people for the narrative that if anything bad happens in eastern Ukraine, it wasn't the terrorists that America has spent the past 7 years training by the CIA paramilitaries, but it was the Russians doing it to themselves to generate an excuse to go in. And so, that was kind of my first skeptical thought I had in mind is, boy, this statement really primes the American people to blame Russia for anything that happens coming up in Ukraine. And so there was actually a pretty large, I guess, cyber attack. I mean, I guess large is by the standard putting out by the media, so maybe put a question mark by that. But they say it was a pretty large cyber attack that hit a lot of Ukrainian government websites on Friday. Now, I believe most everything is up and running back again and everything like that. The U.S. offered support to figure out, who did it, but also to replace, I guess, anything that was damaged, broken, or, whatever improvements need to be made to security to ensure that this doesn't happen again. At the time I'm recording this show, the U.S., Ukraine, nobody has pointed the finger at anyone for carrying this out. And I guess I should mention at the same time that while this hack was going on, the Russian FSB, that's their intelligence service, issued a report that they had taken down the hacker group. It's a hacker group or ransomware crime group. Reveal, I guess, reveal maybe. It's RE in capital VIL lowercase. And that was at the request of the United States. This is the group that the United States blames for carrying out the colonial, I think, pipeline hack. I think that was the name of it. It was 6 months or so. There's a pipeline that was hacked and everything like that. The FSB says that they searched 25 addresses, detaining 14 people, listing assets, including 426 million rubles, $600,000, 500,000 euros, computer equipment, and 20 luxury cars. Certainly a lot of money, a lot of cash, I guess, if that's the way it was. Maybe they took it from bank accounts, though. That if that's the case, that was a lot of money that they seized. The United States said that, they were happy that Russia did this. And so I guess if you attribute the Ukraine hack to Russia, the Russia taking down this hacker group maybe doesn't necessarily make sense. If the hack on Ukraine wasn't necessarily from Russia, now it could have been done by separatists in eastern Ukraine who, are supported by Russia and everything like that, but at the same time probably don't do everything at the orders of Vladimir Putin, have their own, hostilities and reasons to lash out against the Ukrainian government without, Russia supporting it all the time. There's private groups that could have done. There's a lot of question marks on who could have carried out this. Also, the possibility of a false flag going the other way or something like that, right? The CIA or CIA-backed group carries out this cyber attack as pretext to then carry out some kind of offensive cyber operation against Russia or something like that. But that's part of the worry here. Although, it could be a sign of good news here, too, that this is another overture that we're seeing from Russia to the United States. They're carrying out a legal request at behest of the United States, showing that the two countries can work together. This kind of thing can be very important if the U.S. chooses to receive that message. Unfortunately, I think the arrest will get buried in favor of the Ukrainian cyber attack. And so, a few more stories on Ukraine here. This from Ben Freeman at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Ukraine launched lobbying blitz ahead of pipeline vote, and he details how Ukraine spent well over $1 million in 2021. Let's see, that money went to 9 different firms. Town Solutions got over $1 million. The two people that I could find who work for Yorktown Solutions also work for the Atlantic Council and German Marshall Fund. There was Carvar Communications got $120,000, and then Ardent Bots got $300,000, and those were kind of the big names. Now, I believe it was the people from Yorktown Solutions was also a former advisor and worked on campaigns for Ted Cruz, who was the senator that was really pushing for and doing everything he can to get a vote on sanctioning Russia over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And so, there's been different proposals on this for some time. Typically, the threat from the United States has been we'll sanction Russia over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline if Russia goes ahead and invades Ukraine. And this bill would sanction Russia as is over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and anybody who's helping Russia. So, this pipeline is going to bring natural gas from Russia into Central Europe. And so we are also threatening here to sanction U.S. allies if they would continue to support the building, construction of, and then eventually, the flow of natural gas through this pipeline. We talked about this on the the 213 with Connor Freeman. And on that show, we explained, how Rand Paul pointed out that this was probably largely based in some mercantilism and all that, but it also seems like maybe it has some cronyism involved too, as, this firm is getting $1 million from the Ukrainian government. By the way, this is a country that says it needs military aid from the United States, right? So it has plenty of money to pay our senators to, write bills to send the Ukrainians more money, but it doesn't have money to just buy their own military equipment. This is the level of cronyism that we're discussing here. And so, so Cruz proposed this bill that was sanctioned the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and it failed 55 to 44. It needed 60 votes, so it was 5 votes short, even though it did have a majority in the Senate. I believe 6 Democrats voted for it. Rand Paul was the Republican that voted no, and good to see that this got voted down. However, I think part of the reason that it got voted down was because the day before, Democrats unveiled a bill that would issue heavy sanctions on Russia should Russia invade Ukraine, and these included sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, but also on Vladimir Putin and kicking Russia out of SWIFT. This would be a full-on almost embargo of Russia if the U.S. were actually to try to implement what is in this bill if it ends up passing. So I think part of the reason that this bill ends up getting proposed is for the Democrats to undermine the Ted Cruz bill, because the Ted Cruz bill cuts against the Biden foreign policy, and I'll talk a little bit more about the reason why in a second. Now, I find the Democratic bill extremely problematic anyways, and almost more of a threat than the Ted Cruz bill, because that was a little bit more partisan, and it seemed ridiculous. Like, it seemed very unlikely to pass a bill that was going to harm the president's foreign policy as much as Ted Cruz's did. But this this bill is like an authorization for economic warfare, where essentially you're giving the president the ability to turn on a full-scale economic war against Russia at any time. And the problem that I have is, the trigger for the sanctions in the bill is a Russian invasion of Ukraine, which, if we look at it, and Russia actually goes in and invades Ukraine, as I've talked about on the show in the past, I think they fully expect to be heavily sanctioned. And so it actually isn't that much of a deterrent or threat on Russia. However, this is just going to sit around, and by the foreign policy establishment, they've already said that Russia has invaded Ukraine, that Russia has and moves, more forces into eastern Ukraine to bat the separatists there and everything like that. And so I think the real danger here is that this is setting up a scenario that any president who wants to now has the authorization to instantly open an economic war with Russia over Ukraine. Now, the Germans, a key U.S. ally in all of this, and of course, through the 4 years of the Trump administration, we can't believe how he treats our NATO allies and Angela Merkel and all this kind of stuff. Well, now Germany really wants to get natural gas through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, because it's really going to bring down energy prices and be huge for Central Europe. And they're saying, look, don't drive the Nord Stream 2 pipeline into the Ukraine conflict. And so this is what Biden is dealing with. If he sanctions Russia over Nord Stream 2, it's going to piss the hell off of our German allies, right? They don't want any of this. This is the U.S. sanctioning the Nord Stream 2 pipeline would be taking the side of the corrupt Ukrainian government over the side of the NATO allied German government. Absolutely unbelievable. But that's what so many members of Congress want. That's what I guess the administration is just unwilling to do, but I think would kind of prefer to sanction the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. But again, it would just create too many problems with Germany for them to do so. All right, so let's talk about the talks a little bit that happened. We already broke down the talks directly between the U.S. and Russia. That was the U.S. Undersecretary of State, Wendy Sherman, talking with the Russian, I think, Deputy Foreign Minister, and they spoke for 8 hours. Nothing came of the talks. The U.S. proposed potentially an INF-like deal, talked about missile deployments, maybe scaling back war games in Eastern Europe. Russia was really concerned about the Ukraine issue, particularly the NATO issue. And so those talks happened, but then we also had talks on the 13th or the 12th, that is, Wednesday, between Russia and NATO. I think this was the first meeting of the Russia-NATO Council since 2019. So, in that way, these talks were significant. They lasted 4 hours, but much like the talks between Sherman and Russia in Vienna, these talks really seem to have not netted anything. Now, talks are talks, in that, even if the first round doesn't really generate any results, it doesn't mean that the two sides don't go back to their, respective countries. They say, oh, we could actually work on this, and this is an area that something can be done productively. Also, we don't know everything that came up in the talks. And so, maybe Sherman really said, like, hey, if you guys take down this hacker group, this ransomware group, then that's going to open up some room for the U.S. to negotiate on other issues. And maybe part of what's happening, now actually between Russia and the U.S. does have something to do with the talks, and we just don't know about it publicly. But at least from what we know publicly, it doesn't seem like very much of anything has come from them. Russia are post talks. It seems that NATO said that the two sides should keep talking, and Russia just really kind of said that there's no grounds for future talks unless the U.S. Is willing to show some flexibility. And I think they're mainly talking about and around the the Ukraine issue, and this was a statement by the Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Rabkov. And so doesn't seem like maybe things are going to progress in the right direction, but doesn't mean that the U.S. won't, send through some bad channels or give Russia some sort of sign that, maybe we are willing to talk on the Ukraine issue. So that's what I have on the talks that happened this past week. Again, 2 rounds of talk, one between the U.S. and Russia, one between U.S., NATO, and Russia. No agreements, nothing major. U.S. made some proposals that, maybe if they were made 5-6 years ago would have been far more substantial, but now where the U.S. is including and treating Ukraine almost as a NATO member, giving it weapons, saying we're going to defend Ukraine's sovereignty all the time, all these training programs going on with Ukrainian forces. I think Russia is looking for a far stronger guarantee than just not putting weapons, more like Patriot missiles or something like that, into Ukraine, and really looking for a more substantial guarantee on Ukrainian and Georgian also NATO membership. All right, a few more stories on, the U.S., Russia, and the new Cold War to mention here. The Baltic states were in talks with NATO to increase the number of troops on their soil. So this would be Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and this bad news if it's happening, because this is counter to what should be happening at the talks, which is the two sides moving troops away from their borders, not towards each other's borders. Jade Sullivan says the chance of a Russian invasion of Ukraine is high. And of course, the administration is in complete spin mode that this is all Russians' fault. They even have Victoria Nuland, of all people, one of the key figures in kicking off and creating this crisis. Now, we could go back to 2008, Dick Cheney, George Bush, and those neocon boys all deciding that they're going to put Ukraine and Georgia on a NATO plan of action, membership plan of action, right? That's a lot of the roots of this, but also that 2014 coup was also very, very key in that. And so the fact that Victoria Nuland is out there running around blaming Russia for everything is very concerning. And I don't think that, some kind of limited Russian military intervention in Ukraine isn't completely unlikely, but I don't know if I agree with Sullivan that the chances of an actual invasion are high. Russia also just threw this out. This again, Sergei Rabkov, Dave DeCamp writes this off at antiwar.com. Russian official doesn't rule out sending military to Cuba and Venezuela. And in a way, this seems to maybe be Russia trying to, and Jade Sullivan dismissed this as bluster, which I think in some sense it is, because I don't think Russia is going to put like a major military deployment in Cuba and like create like a Cuban Missile Crisis, or in Venezuela. And those two Latin American countries may not want to have quite such a large NATO bullseye drawn on them if that sort of thing would happen. But this may be a Russian attempt to try to get the United States to understand why putting troops in, the other country's sphere of influence is so intolerable, and maybe trying to, if we put some troops in Cuba, then, we could remove 1,000 troops from Cuba and the U.S. could remove 1,000 troops from Poland or Estonia or something like that. Last up, the Russian-led security blot. These are the troops from the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO. This Dave DeCamp wrote up on the 13th at antiwar.com that they were beginning to leave. As of the 15th of January, I read this morning, it was being reported widely in media, that withdrawal of 2,000 troops from Kazakhstan has been complete. Now, with that, I guess I'm somewhat skeptical that like did maybe 10, 20, or a small number of Russian troops like hang around Kazakhstan, either in what they call a training mission, an advising mission, or maybe to guard just some like really key assets or something like that's possible. If, a few pictures of Russian troops turns up in Kazakhstan in the coming weeks or months, I won't be entirely surprised, but it doesn't seem like they kept like an occupation force or all 2,000 troops, and a good majority, if not all, the Russian troops are now out of Kazakhstan. And funny because, the U.S., of course, just 3 days ago was warning Kazakhstan that you'll never get them to leave. All right, news on Ethiopia. Now we've had some pretty major updates in that war. So the conflict going on is between mainly the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF. And so this started off in November of 2020. It's been going on for well over a year now, and has seen kind of both sides taking advantage. The Ethiopian government seems to initially have really rolled over and taken the entire Tigray region. The TPLF, turned more into an insurgency than a national military, and was able to push the Ethiopian government out of the Tigray region, but then also to reconstitute more of an army and to take territory in neighboring Ethiopian regions of different ethnic groups, particularly the Afar and Amhara region. And was, reports that they were pushing towards the capital of Ethiopia. I think that this was somewhat overstated. They were hundreds of miles, 200 miles at least away from the capital at the closest. And so, that they were like really close to taking the capital may have been an overstatement, but they had also paired up with some other ethnic militias, including from Oromo and Amhara ethnic groups, right? And so there were advances in different directions also being made on the capital. And then the Ethiopian government opened up its air force, and particularly its drone force that had been provided to from the UAE, Turkey, and Iran, and has driven the TPLF back to, I think, more traditionally Tigrayian ethnic areas. And so with that, the president of Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, issued a statement calling for national reconciliation and allowed several prominent members of the opposing groups to be released from prison. Now, this does seem to be a sign and an effort by the Ethiopian government to end the conflict in the country. They said, I think, that they wouldn't go further into the Tigrayian region at this point, although I'll get into the airstrikes a little bit more in a second. But, that is, I guess, the best case, that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia is looking for a chance to end this conflict. He hasn't pushed into Ethiopia to Tigray more, and carried out this prisoner release of, again, high-profile political figures, Tigrayian, Oromo, Amhara, and so this could be important. Now, I don't know who was released from prison. I don't know the factions of the TPLF. I don't know if maybe there is something more underhanded to this, and it isn't quite the peace overture that it's being presented as in the media and by Abiy. There could be something more nefarious here that I just don't understand, because I don't understand Ethiopian politics well enough. And so I just wanted to, make that clear, because while Abiy has not pushed his troops further into Tigray at this point, airstrikes are hammering the region. The UN reported that over 100 civilians were killed in Tigray so far this year. That's just in the first 2 weeks of 2022. That's not talking about things that happened in December or anything like that, including 56 people being killed in an airstrike on an IDP camp. Tons of the people there killed, wounded, and children. We also had an airstrike on January 7th that killed 3 people in a refugee camp. And then on January 10th, Joe Biden spoke with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia on a phone. I mean, this is a pretty prominent call for an African leader to be, having a call with Joe Biden. And on that day, actually, there was, I think the day before was the day 56 people were killed. But on that day, there were, I think, 17 or 19 people that were killed by Ethiopian airstrikes in the Tigray region. And so they certainly haven't let up with the air war yet. Now, they may have, obviously, they're hitting refugee, IDP, internally displaced people camps, things like that, how do you really have an excuse to bomb these kind of areas? Maybe they have bad intelligence. Maybe they're not much better at using the drones than the Americans are, who have bombed these kind of places all along. But at the same time, maybe the TPLF is trying to like reconstitute some reins and to reform up some, and there could be not legitimate reasons for bombing the IDP camp, but as far as the war goes, if there's a war happening and people are building up military forces and you're trying to bomb them, then that's not a huge surprise. Now, it's very interesting that Biden hasn't, for all the things that he's gotten criticized for in the past weekend, it has been a rough week for Biden. So I guess I'm not surprised that Ethiopia didn't make a big piece of news, but that he talked to the leader of a country that, was dropping bombs, killing civilians the day before and after he spoke with Joe Biden is somewhat concerning, and you have to wonder what happened on that phone call. Now, last up here, we have the UN or doctors in the Tigrayian region, not the UN, just doctors in the Tigrayian region, reporting that people are dying in Tigray for preventable medical causes, including children, because of a lack of medical supplies and all of that. They say it's happened to at least 100 people so far. I believe it's true. Pretty nasty war zone and all of that. I also want to mention, though, that I think that the title of the show is Breakthrough News. It's Rania Kalik and Eugene, and sorry, I forget Eugene's last name, but they've actually been in Ethiopia for some time now. They have, from the beginning, taken a line that seems almost overly supportive of Abiy. Don't want to, be too critical of Rania and Eugene, because I think they're doing good, work here and generally trying to articulate a point that is particularly not being made in the U.S. mainstream media. But at times it seems almost a little dogmatic, their support for Abiy and their hatred for the TPLF. But at the same time, they have been in Ethiopia, so good on them for going to a war zone, and they've been doing some good on the ground reporting there, including going to facilities that were in territory that definitely was in control of the TPLF, and showing evidence that those medical facilities and things were looted. And they've said that hundreds of people have died from the lack of medical care as well on the Ethiopian side of this because of the actions of the TPLF. So very possible that both sides are doing this. Also possible that either or both are being, subject to misinformation, right? That the TPLF are wrecking their own medical facilities, taking pictures, blaming it on the Ethiopian government doing the same to the TPLF. All right. Haiti news. We had the arrest of another suspect in the assassination of Haiti's president, Jovenel Moïse. Moïse was killed July 7th this past summer, and since Haiti has been ruled essentially by a prime minister. Just for some clarification, there was the president in charge. Now I don't think there's a same president at all. The prime minister essentially has control, and so the latest arrest was Rodolphe Jar, and his last name is spelled Jaar, and so I might not be pronouncing that great. But he was arrested in the Dominican Republic, same island as Haiti. He fled the Haitian half, got arrested at the request of the United States, and that was after Mario Antonio Placeos was arrested by the United States. I believe he was arrested in Panama, and talked about this on the last show we talked about Haiti on. He was in Jamaica, fled, or wasn't able to get asylum there, was trying to make it back to Colombia where he's a national, and was arrested on the way by the United States in Panama, was apparently cooperating with the police and gave whatever information needed to the United States to have the cause to arrest Jar. Now, there's this article by the New York Times that comes out about the same time as Rodolphe Jar's arrest, but this makes it a little bit more interesting because the New York Times actually talked to him while he was on the run. And so I just want to do a short little recap of something. So in July, we had the assassination of Morsi. Talked in the past on the show about the New York Times reporting, and especially from statements gave from Morsi's wife, who has survived the assassination attempt, the belief that he was arrested because he was going to provide a drug dossier to the U.S. government, to the DEA, to take down some of the drug gangs within Haiti. And don't know if that's true or not, but that's the narrative put forward. But I think that this current reporting ties to that a little bit. Right after Morsi was assassinated, the power in Haiti went to the prime minister, who was a man named Claude Joseph. At the behest of the U.S. Western pressure, Joseph was pushed out of power, and a man named Ariel Henry took over the prime ministership. So this New York Times article titled "Haitian Prime Minister Had Close Links with Murder Suspects" is detailing Ariel Henry's connection with people who were possibly behind the assassination, including Mr. Jar here. Now, let's see. I believe, just mentioned 44 people in total have been arrested in Haiti for the assassination, including 18 Colombian military men, and I think 6 people with either American citizenship or permanent resident status. And so, yeah, let's get into this. And I guess Henry's closest ties to the assassination come through Joseph Felix Badio, and Badio, it probably is pronounced. Badio was apparently recruited, or Jar was recruited into the plot against Morsi by Badio, right? And so there's phone records and reported visits from Badio to Henry, both before, immediately after, and then, in the months after the assassination of Jovenel Morsi, the president. So those are really interesting ties. Henry has dismissed the chief prosecutor, and the prosecutor believes that Henry would be a key suspect in the assassination, were he not the leader of the country. Jar admits that he helped fund the plot and contributed $130,000. He said that he did this for a few reasons. Now, remember, this is a man who's involved in a criminal plot against a country's president. He's going to maybe present or leave out some facts that are more incriminating to him or whatever. But he claims that the president wasn't going to be killed, just, disposed. And he thought that, the president was becoming increasingly authoritarian and terrible. And that Badio had a close ties with Henry, and that would give Jar an opportunity to get government contracts, and essentially just corruption and cronyism and everything like that. And but then he finally agreed on his involvement because he heard that the Americans would back it. And so, there's a lot of things here that maybe are true, maybe not. Maybe he didn't hear the Americans would back it. Maybe somebody told him that the Americans were back it, and that person just made it up. Maybe the Americans were actually backing this assassination or overthrow mostly for whatever reason. Completely unclear and all of that, but you do have a suspect making that claim. Very, very interesting, all of this. And just not exactly sure of what's happening in Haiti at this point, but want to continue to talk about all this. Now, one mention, and this was a point made by Ryan Grimm on Morning Rising, I think it's called. Not the greatest show, but he does break down this article and talk about how it's not until the very bottom of the article do they mention that Jar said he was only involved because the Americans backed it. And then it really doesn't go in or investigate that anymore, which I would think would be the key piece in all of this is what involvement did the Americans have? Now, Americans has been involved in Haiti for a long time. And so I think another piece of this is if Jar is being honest and, maybe the U.S. actually didn't sign off on this, but somebody told him that the U.S. did. The fact that he would go along with this because he thought the U.S. signed off on it also, just talks about the overall problem with the U.S. interference in this region has been, for such a long time. Couple other stories on Haiti. Tons of people trying to flee the country, tens of thousands, coming to the U.S., coming to Mexico, applying for asylum wherever. And the U.S. has been overwhelmingly just sending them back. The Coast Guard just took 176 Haitians off a wooden sailing vessel, and they claimed it was unseaworthy. I don't know. They could have just been stopping this boat because they didn't want them to make it into the United States. But these people are being sent back to Haiti. We also had this article at Reason.com titled Haitians Meet the New Deporter-in-Chief, talking about how Biden has essentially, just dropped the fake spray tan from Donald Trump and is acting just like him when it comes to the treatment of migrants, particularly the fact that the Border Patrol is arresting it has 17,000 arrests in September of 2021. So that's 2 months after this assassination. And just, the fact that the U.S. has such a large role in, the artificial poverty that the Haitian people currently face every day. And that, we're now turning those people back and treating them so brutally is pretty disgusting, especially, when Donald Trump comes in and does it. At least he said he was going to do it. Biden was going to be, the great humanitarian on this issue. And it's almost worse because nobody actually cares and there's no political pressure on Biden to be any better on it. Last story on Haiti, and part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is this seems like the kind of thing that's going to get a lot of play in the United States. It's a very, very sensational title. A kidnapped gang stole a maternity hospital's new generator in Haiti. Now it has to close. And so what it sounds like was happening was there was a $38,000 generator that was going to be delivered to a hospital in Haiti that had a pretty key maternity ward. And I believe as it was being delivered, right? It's not like they went to a maternity hospital and stole the generator. But as the generator was on the way to the hospital, I have no idea if they knew it was going to the hospital, what it was for, if they just knew there was some expensive equipment on the truck or whatever, but the generator was stolen by apparently gangs in Haiti. That's at least who's blamed. So I think this is going to draw a lot of attention because it's, very easy to get on. Gangs stole a generator meant for babies who are dying in the hospital. And yeah, that technically did happen, but it's not quite what happened. And, I think the real story on the chaos and the terrible humanitarian situation in Haiti is far more about the U.S. legacy of intervention and our current intervention in Haiti, although the gains there certainly prevent a massive problem for the people. All right, so let's talk about Yemen, and we're going to continue to talk about the Shabwa province, which is southern central Yemen. Probably it shares some coastal region between, I think it's Aden and Makala. Would be kind of the two or bigger port cities on the Gulf of Aden there, Yemen's southern coast. And the Houthis had taken a lot of the province that was the north of Shabwa, that's Mareb, and then had also made some progress in Shabwa. And then this was apparently turned back in in Shabwa and in part in Marib, and this was because of an offensive made by the UAE-backed Giants Brigade. And there's an article on the Giants Brigade at Middle East Eye. It sounds like a very interesting group, as you know, oftentimes is the case with the war in Yemen. It's never as simple as you think it is. Like the UAE bats this side on the ground and the Saudis bat this side. The Giants Brigade apparently falls under like an umbrella group of soldiers that is, I think it's the nephew of Ali Abdullah Saleh, the longtime leader of Yemen from like 1990 until the initial coup in 2012, and then he held, you know, some important roles as he aligned with the Houthis in post 2015 and all of that. But the Giants Brigade is a part of that, but it seems to be the key fighting force and a part of that. But this is a UAE-backed group in Yemen. Typically, the UAE-backed groups in Yemen are more supportive of the Southern Transitional Council than the Saudi-backed government, which is led by Hadi. But this UAE-backed group is supportive of Hadi. Now, according to ACLED, that's the Armed Conflict Location and Data Project, the Giants Brigade are primarily composed of ultra-conservative Salafist fighters. And, Salafist fighters, it's probably a little bit of a wider, umbrella than just like Osama bin Laden and al-Baghdadi. But, the Salafist fighters are jihadists, right? We're not talking about the moderate rebels or anything like that. We're talking about people who are associated probably and as has been talked about a long time in this war, including by Nasser Arabi, the Yemeni journalist. American allies, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are backing jihadist elements on the ground in Yemen. And so this could be more evidence of that. But this group made up 15,000 fighters, made some serious gains on the ground in Yemen, and pushed the Houthis back quite significantly. Now, elsewhere on the ground in Yemen, I read a couple of interesting articles that I think are very important. And they so both at Responsible Statecraft, and one points out that there is a little bit more food production going on in Yemen as people have become so desperate for food. And as talked about like on this show for years and years, the Yemeni people were like conned out of growing their typical staple like calorie crop and pushed by international loans to make more crops like coffee for the international market and everything like that. But as this war has gone on and the Yemen people have been starved to death, more and more people have gone and started growing food. And so apparently the food crisis in Yemen at least hasn't gotten that much worse in the past year. Also, it talks about that the Houthis have been particularly competent in governing northern Yemen. And so because the security is better there, the exchange rate is better there, the prices are better there, people are leaving southern Yemen, the places held by the U.S. Supported side of this war, and going and staying with the Houthis. And, moving, I guess, wealth and capital and everything from southern Yemen into northern Yemen of Sana'a, and the Houthis have been welcoming this. And so it's not exactly a surprise. I've been talking about on the show for a long time that the Saudis have been trying to, ride cheap on this war by printing a bunch of Yemeni rials to flood into southern Yemen. The Houthis have refused to accept these new banknotes, and so their exchange rate has stayed far more better and more consistent. In southern Yemen, there's fighting going on between the Saudi-backed Hadi government and the UAE-backed Southern Transition Council pretty frequently, that causes, crises and ruling instability and everything like that. So not surprising that the people of Yemen are choosing the Houthi-led control over the Saudi U.S. bad side of this. Couple more stories on Yemen. Saudi Arabia says that the ports of Yemen are legitimate targets, and they're also talking about critically the port of Hodeidah, Yemen's port that's able to support the largest tankers and everything like that coming in. The way you could really get the kind of goods into Yemen needed to support the country's 28 million people. It takes a lot of commerce to support that, and then not everything could be made internally. And so having this port open is key, and Saudi Arabia is again threatening to bomb it. Of course, at the beginning of the war, they bombed the stationary cranes that are at ports, right? The giant things that take the container ships off of everything, and the Houthis have had to use smaller cranes that are more mobile and stuff like that don't unload these ships nearly as quickly as the stationary cranes would and everything like that. But Saudi Arabia is again threatening to bomb this port, and that it would be probably a horrendous loss for the Yemeni people to have this lifeline cut shorter than it already has been. Although the Saudis have been essentially preventing anything from making it to the port recently. I believe 5 fuel tankers have been turned away from the port recently because Saudi Arabia says, they need to be inspected and things like that time and time again. Saudi Arabia, it says, urgent situation. They're running out of Patriot missiles. This I've been talking about on the show, and I think is going to be the important fight coming up, maybe in the next month, but maybe even sooner. We could be talking about by the end of January. The U.S., we're going to have to stand up, particularly the anti-war community, and really try to make a fight over this, because if we could cut Saudi Arabia off from their interceptors, then Saudi Arabia will be vulnerable to Houthi attacks and may actually have to negotiate to end this war rather than just keeping on this medieval siege that's starving and killing hundreds of thousands of Yemenis. Now, Saudi Arabia says that the reason they need the U.S. support in this war is because Iran is backing the Houthis, and they recently made a statement and showed some footage to support this. And when you look at the footage, it actually comes from 2003 and the invasion of Iraq, and that this was from Baghdad, and in no way even from Yemen at all. Not like it was from Yemen in 2003, it was from Iraq. And so Saudi Arabia had to admit that they, made this mistake after it was obviously exposed. I mean, they didn't even try to edit out this little wooden stool that's sitting there that makes it a guarantee that this is not only the same place, but the exact same footage. Everything was in the exact same place. And so, this is the kind of thing that you expect from the Saudis. And honestly, I think back up the point that I've been making on the show for some time, that there's really not that much support from Iran to the Houthis. Not that there's none, but if there was a lot of real support, I'm sure the Saudis would be turning it up. Now, let's talk about Korea and wrap up the show today, where they are testing missiles, 3 so far in January. The first 2 they say are hypersonic missile tests. The third they say were 2 short-range ballistic missiles fired from a train. I am very skeptical that they fired 2 hypersonic missiles. Now, hypersonic could be a loose definition, right? It's not like the missile is anything that special. It just goes faster than a traditional ballistic missile and things like that. Now, they also have hypersonic missiles with gliders that are supposed to be able to travel like a cruise missile at high speed and all this kind of stuff. And I'm very skeptical that North Korea has hypersonic missile technology. And my guess is that really what they're, I would assume, focusing on is just having enough ballistic missiles that they could fire them at the U.S. or U.S. territories to provide an effective deterrent, and actually aren't that concerned about developing high-tech hypersonic missiles in the way maybe Russia or China is doing. But I could be wrong about that, but that's my strong guess on it, is that North Korea is more looking at just having a deterrent and not the most advanced nuclear program that there is. The rail-fired missiles sound like something that North Korea has been working on for a long time. They're just short-range ballistic missiles, but firing them from a train, I guess, would give North Korea the ability to have, missiles that were hard to hit or take out by the United States because they got a lot of rail line. So all those are going on. Of course, just before the test happened, South Korean President Moon Jae-in was saying that he had effective agreements with the United States on ending the Korean War, that he had, in principle, reached agreements with China and North Korea on ending the Korean War, that was going to make a real push for that before he left office in the coming months. Now, in one sense, North Korea, I guess, they probably generate the most effective thoughts after they've, had missile tests. If they don't test missiles, the United States and everybody completely forgets about them. And so anytime North Korea or anybody proposes talks, the U.S. says, well, if North Korea denuclearizes, we'll engage in talks, which is a complete non-starter, right? North Korea is never going to do that. And so maybe this is North Korea's backwards way. Doesn't, mainly seem like the way I would, necessarily suggest going about, but a way North Korea is trying to generate some attention from the, actors within the United States in order to engage in effective talks where the United States is willing to make the concessions needed to actually get a deal done. This could also be North Korea just trying to say we're not interested in talks, I suppose, as well. That certainly seems to be more the way the U.S. media is portraying it, that this is Kim Jong-un's way of rejecting talks with the United States overall. Now, one of the tests, I believe it was the second hypersonic test, so the middle test overall, for whatever reason, triggered the U.S. early warning system. And so apparently the initial computer test, for whatever reason, thought the missile could strike as far as California or the Aleutian Islands, and flights were halted, I believe, just for a few minutes on the U.S. West Coast because of this missile test. And so, interesting way it actually does affect the lives of Americans a little bit. After the second hypersonic test, the U.S. announced sanctions on 5 North Koreans, and then I believe one entity that was maybe in part Russian, and was also trying to impose new sanctions on North Korea at the UN Security Council. Doesn't seem like the U.S. will make it very far there. My guess is that neither China nor Russia really have any interest in allowing new sanctions against North Korea, but you never know. If they're really working on maybe some advanced hypersonic missiles or something, China or Russia could find that kind of aggressive or too much and look to, constrain North Korea a little bit by agreeing to sanctions. Although, again, I think it's very unlikely. North Korea responded by saying that the sanctions were profoundly destabilizing, and then, made some threats along the lines of, we would do more things if the United States, continues to try to impose sanctions. Some people, I think, were interpreting that the 2 missiles launched from the train were a response to the sanctions. I'm not sure about that. It could just be a round of missile tests. Also important, nobody ever thinks about this with North Korea, or especially not in the U.S. mainstream media. But there also are North Korean internal politics. The Kim family, Kim Jong-un, his sister, had to maintain their grip and control over power. There's a lot of factors to balance here. The people are desperately poor and starving, and then also there's a ruling class in North Korea that extends beyond the Kim family. And so maybe part of this was like appeasing the military leadership, or trying to show strength to the Korean people or something like that. They claim that they're testing these hypersonic missiles. Well, then Kim could be like, look, we have more advanced missiles than the United States has. This is what you guys have been sacrificing for all this time. And so it could be more internal Korean politics than we like to realize, but at the same time, based on the relation in time to Moon Jae-in's like announcements on potential agreements to end the Korean War. This seems like it has more to do with that. And again, it could be, Korea, the North Koreans trying to find a good, strong position to enter talks with, where they feel like the Americans will have to take them seriously and negotiate, and not just come in with non-starters like denuclearize and then we'll consider lifting sanctions. Or it could be a North Korean rejection of talks altogether. So interesting what's happening with these missile tests, but largely North Korea has not been in discussion for the entire first year of the Biden administration. And so these tests are, putting North Korea back on the political map in the United States. And I expect that to continue in 2022. All right, that's where I'll wrap up for today. Again, everybody, thank you so much for all the support for the show. Just continue to share it and buy your CBD at Paloma Verde. Donate to the Institute and antiwar.com. And as long as you guys are continuing to be awesome and stuff, I'll do not just the show, but more bonus shows and stuff too. So thanks, everybody.